Hello, everyone, friends. Listen, have you ever caught yourself thinking that life is the craziest playwright in the world? We are used to boring facts from textbooks, but reality is much more inventive. Today, you will learn about a mysterious 9-meter log that has been controlling the weather in Oregon for over 100 years, a Japanese marathon runner whose race lasted an incredible 54 years, and an entire city in Alaska where residents haven't gone outside for years because the whole city is just one single high-rise building. Before we begin, please support us with a like and let us know in the comments which city you are watching us from. This greatly helps our channel grow. So, are you ready to be amazed? Get comfortable, we are just getting started. Story number 1. The Wooden Elder Who Controlled the Weather. Imagine the deepest lake in the United States, Crater Lake in Oregon. The water there is so blue that it seems like someone dumped a tanker of ink into it. The silence is so profound that it rings in your ears. This place alone resembles a temple of nature, but there is one detail in it that has been making scientists scratch their heads for over 100 years. In this lake lives an elder. And no, it is neither a hermit with a beard nor an ancient monster. It is an ordinary log at first glance, a 9-meter piece of Canadian wood. It may seem like just a floating piece of timber, but here's what is strange. This log does not float like all normal logs, horizontally. Instead, it stands in the water vertically, like a buoy or a submarine periscope that forgot to dive. About 1 meter and 20 centimeters of sun-bleached wood sticks out above the surface, while the rest is hidden in the dark, icy depths. And the most incredible part is that it does not sink and does not rot. The first to notice it was geologist Joseph Diller. This was in 1996. Diller made an entry in his diary, shrugged, and left. After 5 years, he returned, and oh, miracle! The elder was right there, still proudly sticking out of the water, swaying on the waves. Since then, they began to monitor the log as if it were a Hollywood star. You might think, well, maybe it just got stuck at the bottom on some rock. But no. Crater Lake is deep, reaching up to 600 meters in places. The elder is completely free. He is a traveler. In 1938, scientists decided to seriously track him. In 3 months, this wooden pilgrim traveled nearly 100 kilometers, moving chaotically across the lake as if patrolling his territory. The physics of this phenomenon remains a subject of debate among hydrologists. Why doesn't it fall on its side? Why hasn't the water soaked it through enough in over 100 years to pull it to the bottom? There is a theory that when the tree fell into the water, which likely happened in the 19th century, its roots got tangled in rocks. The rocks acted as an anchor, causing the trunk to take a vertical position. Over time, the rocks fell away, but the lower part of the log soaked up water and became heavier than the upper part. A perfect balance, a natural weeble. But that's all boring science. The most interesting part began in 1988. And this is no longer a theory, but a fact documented in logbooks. That year, scientists decided to conduct research on the lake using a submarine, but an old man, as if by fate, kept wandering around the dive zone. Navigation there was tricky, and they didn't want to risk expensive equipment, so the researchers decided to do something no one had ever thought of before. They caught the old man, tied him up with a rope, and towed him back to shore, tying him to rocks somewhere in the quiet bay. Just sit here for now, grandfather, and don't disturb progress. And this is where reality went awry. The moment they confined the log, the sky above Crater Lake turned black. The clear summer sky was covered with leaden clouds. A storm began. But not just a drizzle, it was a real snow blizzard. In August, the temperature plummeted and visibility became zero. It was impossible to work. The scientists sat in their tents, shivering from the cold, watching the raging lake. This went on for several hours until someone from the team, perhaps jokingly or perhaps out of superstitious fear, said, "Listen, could it be because of the log? We tied it up and the lake doesn't like that." Sounds like nonsense, right? But when you've got an expedition costing $1,000 falling apart, you're willing to believe in anything. They went and untied the rope, releasing the old man back into the wild. And you know what? The snow stopped almost immediately. The clouds dispersed and the sun came out again. The lake calmed down. Coincidence? Skeptics might say, certainly, it was an atmospheric front, a difference in pressure, mountainous terrain, but local rangers since then try to leave the old man alone. Let him swim. If the lake has its guardian, it looks just like a piece of old wood that refuses to sink and obey the laws of physics. We often think we control nature, studying it, measuring it, tying it up with ropes, but sometimes all it takes is to simply let go of the rope for the storm to quiet down. And that's a great lesson taught to us by a silent piece of wood. By the way, friends, for the most curious, I left links to all original sources in the description. Feel free to check them out as we continue. Story number 2. The physicist who purred and slept on the keyboard. Science is serious business. People in white coats, thick-framed glasses, formulas that make your head spin, and an absolute ringing silence in libraries. It would seem there is no room for jokes here, but sometimes it is precisely within the walls of strict universities that the most absurd and charming stories are born. Stories you are unlikely to read in a textbook on quantum mechanics. Let's transport ourselves to 1975, Michigan State University. Professor of Physics Jack Hetherington had just completed the work of his life, or, at least, a very important article on the behavior of atoms at ultra-low temperatures. He was satisfied. The text was perfect. The data lined up. And he was about to submit the manuscript to the most prestigious scientific journal of the time, Physical Review Letters. But before submitting, he decided to show the work to a colleague, just in case. The colleague scanned the text, nodded, and said a single phrase that nearly ruined Hetherington's career. "Jack, great job, but you have a problem with pronouns here. You keep using we. We discovered. We calculated. But the author is only you alone. So what? It seems like a small detail. This is a scientific style, and we sounds more solid. But the journal's editorial team is known for being picky. They had a strict rule. If there is only one author, they must write I. If we is used, there must be at least 2 authors, otherwise the article will simply be returned without being read." Imagine Jack's horror. In those days, there were no computers with a find and replace button. Everything was typed on typewriters. Rewriting the entire article to change every we to I would take days, and deadlines were looming, and he felt defeated. Then the professor's gaze fell on the corner of the office. There, on a soft chair, curled up, was his best friend Chester, asleep. Chester was a Siamese cat. He loved milk, sleeping on warm papers, and sometimes loudly meowing when Jack was working on calculations for too long. Hetherington thought, why not? If the journal needs a second author for the word we, they will get one. But simply naming the co-author as his cat Chester would be undignified. Science requires gravitas. So Jack came up with a pseudonym for him. He took Chester's name, added his father's name, Willard, and the scientific classification of the domestic cat, Felis catus. Thus, the esteemed scientist F.D.K. Willard emerged. They submitted the article, and guess what? It was accepted and published. It was a success. Physicists all over the country cited the work of Hetherington and Willard, admiring the depth of their joint analysis, and no one had a clue that the second author was busy chasing a candy wrapper at that time. The secret became public completely accidentally and quite hilariously. One day, an important guest arrived at the university to personally discuss the article with the authors. Hetherington was not present. "Where is the co-author, Dr. Willard?" the guest asked the department secretary. The secretary, apparently tired of this comedy, silently pointed at the cat who was licking his paw right on the professor's desk. There was no scandal at all. The scientific community, surprisingly, was thrilled. Cat Willard became a celebrity. He was even offered a position as a professor, as a joke, of course. Colleagues began sending him letters. It is said that Hetherington replied to some of them by stamping a paw print dipped in ink. F.D.K. Willard became the only cat in history whose scientific career was officially documented. This story reminds us that even in the strictest of rules, there is always a loophole for friendship and a good joke, because sometimes, to solve a complicated problem, you just need to look at the one who is sleeping in your chair. But if you think that animals in human history only slept or accidentally made it into scientific journals, You are mistaken. Some of them worked harder than you and I. Story number 3. An aristocratic sparrow in the London Underground, the Metropolitan. It is a separate world. A city beneath a city. Noise, crowd, hurry. People rush to work, read newspapers, doze off. No one looks around. But sometimes, if you lift your head from your phone, you can see things that will make you doubt the reality of what is happening. In 1994, at one of the London Underground stations, deep underground, a bird took up residence, a common house sparrow. Nothing special, a brown ball of feathers chirping under the arches of a concrete tunnel. It probably flew in accidentally through the ventilation, or hitching a ride on someone's backpack. And so this sparrow began its little life in the underground. At first, it was simply amusing. Passengers waiting for trains smiled as they watched it hop around the platform gathering crumbs from sandwiches. Someone tossed it a piece of bread, someone else a cookie. The sparrow, let's call him Jack, although he surely had a more noble name, quickly realized that the food here was better than above ground. It was warm, dry, and there were no predatory cats or mischievous boys with slingshots. But Jack was not just a freeloader, he was an aesthete. One morning during rush hour, a woman stood on the platform eating a croissant. Fresh, crunchy, right from the bakery. Jack flew up to her, landed on her shoulder, and delicately pecked a piece. The woman gasped in surprise but then laughed. "What a little rascal," she said, holding out the leftovers. Jack accepted the treat with dignity. Word spread, and the Sparrow Gourmet flew across London faster than the trains. People began to come to this station specifically to feed the bird, and not just anything. Jack was being brought not stale bread, but French pastries, almond cookies, and chocolate muffins. Some even brought him a piece of expensive brie cheese. Jack developed a daily routine. In the morning, he greeted the first passengers, hopping past the turnstiles as if checking tickets. During the day, when the flow of people thinned, he rested on billboards, preened his feathers, and sang his songs that echoed in the tunnels. And in the evening, when tired office workers returned home, he was back on the hunt for delicacies. It seemed idyllic, but in every fairy tale, there is a villain, or, at the very least, a stern supervisor. The management of the underground began to worry. A bird in the metro is unsanitary. It means droppings on benches, and it poses a potential safety threat. What if it flew into the driver's cabin? A decision was made. The sparrow must be removed. A real operation began. A team of bird catchers was sent to the station with nets, traps, and bait. They set up cages with the tastiest seeds, but Jack was no fool. He ignored the traps, preferring croissants from passengers' hands. It was as if he sensed that he was being hunted and became more cautious. The catches returned again and again, week after week, but every time, Jack slipped away. He hid in the highest nooks, flew from platform to platform right in front of the trains, disappeared into the tunnels, and reappeared when danger passed. Passengers rallied to defend their beloved bird. Articles appeared in newspapers with headlines like, "Hands off Jack," and "Freedom for the Underground Sparrow." People wrote petitions, called the town hall. The sparrow became a symbol of a small rebellion against the system, against the gray, everyday rules. In the end, the subway management gave in. They waved their hands and said, "All right, let it be." And Jack lived for a few more years. He became a local legend. Tourists took photos of him, and children drew postcards. He lived in the subway far longer than ordinary street sparrows. Perhaps it was due to a good diet and a lack of enemies. Or maybe it was simply because he was loved. When Jack was gone, he passed away from old age, quietly and peacefully, somewhere in his nest under the ceiling. An unofficial notice appeared at the station, handwritten by a passenger. Jack lived here, the politest passenger of the London Underground. Thank you for the crumbs and songs. This story reminds us that even in the most soulless mechanisms of a big city, there is always room for a living soul. And sometimes, a little sparrow can unite thousands of people better than any politician. And if you think that animals are only capable of minor mischief like stealing croissants, you're mistaken. Sometimes they change the course of history for entire countries. Story number 4. a plan that no one approved, but everyone executed. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you just started, without permission, without bosses, without a budget? Just took it upon yourself to do something that seems absolutely impossible? And then it turned out that this is exactly what everyone was waiting for? Welcome to 1993, New York, the subway. Yes, it's the subway again, but a completely different one. In those years, the subway of the Big Apple was, to put it mildly, not the most pleasant place. Dirt, confusing announcements, tangled maps. Tourists got lost, locals complained. Navigating there was more complicated than in the Minotaur's labyrinth. And in the midst of this chaos appeared a man named Massimo Vignelli. Massimo was a legendary designer, an Italian through and through. Elegant, in a black suit, he loved order, clean lines, and the Helvetica typeface. He looked at the New York subway map and was horrified. It was not a map, but a plate of spaghetti. Everything was mixed up. The lines were crooked, the colors dirty. "This is a disgrace," Massimo said. "I will fix this." The problem was that no one had asked him to. The city's MTA had not issued a tender. They had no money for redesign, and they were generally fine with how things were. The trains run, so what? But Massimo was stubborn. He gathered a team in his office, just a couple of people, and began working in the evenings and on weekends for free, simply because he was annoyed by the ugliness. He decided to simplify everything, remove unnecessary details, straighten the lines, make the map not geographically accurate but logically understandable, like an electrical wiring diagram. He worked for a year, drawing, drafting, arguing with colleagues. In the end, it resulted in a masterpiece. A map where all the lines ran at angles of 45 or 90 degrees. The colors were bright and clean. The stations were marked with dots. No water, parks, or streets above, just the essentials. When the work was finished, Massimo went to the MTA uninvited. He simply placed his map on the desk of the chief official and said, "Here, use this." The official looked at the map. Later, on Massimo, and then back to the map. "But we didn't order this," he said. "I know," replied the designer, "but it's better than what you have." And at that moment, a miracle occurred. Instead of throwing the intruder out, the official paused to think. The map was indeed beautiful, clear, and modern. "How much do you want for it?" he asked. Massimo named a symbolic amount. He didn't need the money. He needed millions of people to stop wandering in the dark. The MTA accepted the map. It was printed, hung in all the stations, and a scandal erupted. New Yorkers were outraged. "Where is my favorite park?" shouted some. "Why is Central Park square? It's rectangular," complained others. "The water is beige, not blue. Is this a desert?" wondered a third group. People had grown accustomed to geographical accuracy, uncomfortable as it was. Massimo's abstraction felt like mockery to them. The map was labeled a beautiful lie. Ultimately, due to public pressure, it was replaced by something more traditional a few years later. But the story didn't end there. Time passed, and the era of smartphones and applications arrived. Suddenly, it turned out that the Vignelli map was perfect for small phone screens. It is more readable than any other. Today, this incorrect map is considered a classic of world design. It hangs in a modern art museum, and many transportation applications use its principles. Massimo Vignelli proved that sometimes you need to do what you believe is right, even if no one asks for it, and even if you are misunderstood at first. Time will put everything in its place. In the next segment, the initiative of one person led to consequences much stranger and larger than mere design debates. This story is about an entire island that accidentally appeared on the map. Story number 5. An island that did not exist, but taxes were paid from it. Have you ever heard of a place called the Kingdom of Redonda? Probably not, and it's no surprise. It's a tiny uninhabited island in the Caribbean Sea, only 1.5 kilometers long. A rock sticking out of the water, covered with cacti and bird droppings. There is no water, no electricity, and no inhabitants. It seems incredible that anyone would want such a piece of stone. In 1865, there lived an Irishman named Matthew Doughty Shiel, a merchant, a dreamer, and apparently a man with a great sense of humor. He had a son, and Matthew decided to give him an unusual birthday present. Not a toy, not a pony, but a whole kingdom. He sailed to this godforsaken island of Redonda, landed on the shore, which wasn't easy due to the steep cliffs, drank a bottle of rum, and proclaimed himself King Felipe I, naming his newborn son the Crown Prince. From now on and for all eternity, he told the seagulls, this is the land of free people. Well, there were no people there, so the seagulls didn't mind. He sent a letter to Queen Victoria, politely asking for recognition of his sovereignty over the island, promising not to go to war with the British Empire. Apparently, the Queen's office had a laugh, but they replied, do what you want, just don't interfere with trade. Thus, the strangest microstate in the world was born. A kingdom without subjects, but with a king. Years passed, and the son grew up to become the science fiction writer Matthew Phipps Shell. When his father died, he inherited the throne. King Philip II approached this matter creatively. Since there was no one to rule, he decided to create an aristocracy, but not from dukes and counts by birthright, rather from the intellectual elite. He began to bestow titles upon his friends, writers, poets, and artists. Imagine, you are sitting in a London pub, enjoying a beer, when suddenly someone approaches you and says, Sir, for your magnificent poetry, I bestow upon you the title of Duke of Redonda. Sounds like the ramblings of a madman? Perhaps, but people agreed. It was fun. It was an honor in certain circles. Titles like Duke, Archbishop, and Grand Admiral were awarded to well-known literary figures of the time. The Kingdom of Redonda became a sort of closed club for the bohemian crowd. They gathered in cafes, discussed literature, drank wine, and referred to one another as Your Grace. But the most amusing events began later. When the writer-king himself died, he left no direct heirs, leading to a struggle for the throne. Several people immediately declared themselves legitimate kings of Redonda. One claimed that Shell had passed on his rights to him on a napkin in a bar. Another asserted he was a distant relative. The third simply bought a beautiful crown. At one point, Redonda had 9 kings all at once, and they lived in different countries, issuing decrees, minting coins for collectors, and granting titles. One of the kings residing in Antigua even attempted to pay taxes for the island. The British authorities politely refused, but he insisted, sending checks through the mail. Today, the legitimate king is considered to be the Spanish writer Javier Marías. He views his title with irony, yet continues the tradition by awarding a literary prize of the Kingdom of Redonda and distributing ducal titles. Among the dukes is even the Hollywood director Francis Ford Coppola. Thus, a barren rock in the ocean became a symbol that a kingdom is not about land and castles, but a state of mind and good company. Now for the next story. This time, it's not about a fictional kingdom, but about a very real country that once decided to change its borders in a rather unusual way using a shovel and a bucket. Story number 6. A farmer who accidentally altered the map of a country with a cow. Have you ever wondered how fragile borders can be? We tend to think of them as something immutable, barbed wire, border posts, maps drawn in generals' offices. But sometimes, history decides that enough is enough with the formalities and hands over the right to redraw borders to livestock. Listen to the tale of how one stubborn cow nearly rewrote the map of the United States and the British Empire. It was 1859 on San Juan Island, located between the state of Washington and Vancouver Island, a wild, foggy place full of forests and tall grass. At that time, the island was a point of contention between Americans and the British. Both sides claimed it as their own, and both sides begrudgingly tolerated each other's presence. On the island lived American farmers and British workers from the Hudson Bay Company. To say that they got along well would be an understatement. They tried to avoid open conflict until that fateful cow appeared. This cow belonged to a British man who worked for the company, and it seemed to possess an extraordinary sense of culinary adventure. One morning, it decided that the grass in the neighboring field, belonging to an American farmer named Catter, was much greener and sweeter. It jumped over or squeezed through the fence and began leisurely munching on the foreign potatoes. Catter, seeing that his garden was turning into a dining table for someone else's animal, was furious. He grabbed his gun and did something he regretted for the rest of his life. He shot the cow. It seemed trivial. Just a cow, just a farmer. But in the context of the political tension at the time, this became a spark in a powder keg. The British demanded the arrest of Catcher. The Americans claimed that the cow was to blame for trespassing on private property. Words turned into words, and soon a band of American soldiers landed on the island under the command of Captain George Pickett. In response, the British sent 3 warships. Imagine the scene: fog, the quiet island, wooded shores, while in the bay, warships stood ready to fire their cannons over a single eaten potato patch. Soldiers on both sides dug trenches. Officers exchanged angry letters. The situation escalated to a boiling point. If anyone fired first, a full-blown war between 2 world powers could have ignited, a war that could have changed the course of history. But then, something incredible happened. Instead of starting to shoot, the soldiers began to communicate. It turned out they had much in common. They shared coffee, played cards, held running competitions, and even exchanged drinks. American and British soldiers sat by campfires laughing, discussing the absurdity of the situation. They realized that fighting over a cow was, to put it mildly, ridiculous. News of the Pig War, as it is often referred to, even though it started with a cow, reached Washington and London. Presidents and kings were at their wits' end. Were we really going to send thousands of people to their deaths over a potato field? In the end, a compromise was reached. A commission was sent to the island, which decided that both sides should tone down their fervor. The soldiers were withdrawn, and the island was divided in half until a final resolution could be found. This peace lasted a full 12 years. For 12 years, both Americans and British lived on the island, jointly managing it and maintaining order. In 1872, an international arbitration officially granted San Juan Island to the United States. So, thanks to one very hungry cow, 2 stubborn farmers, and the common sense of ordinary soldiers, the world avoided a massive tragedy. This story teaches us an important lesson. Even the most significant conflicts can sometimes start from small things. And, more importantly, they can often be resolved not with guns, but with simple human conversation over a cup of coffee. Story number 7. A state built from concrete and seagulls. We often dream of our own island, somewhere far away from bosses, taxes, and noisy neighbors with drills. However, few have the courage to turn this dream into reality, especially when such islands do not actually exist. Listen to the story of the smallest, most stubborn, and perhaps the strangest self-proclaimed state in the world, the Principality of Sealand. It all began in 1967. In the North Sea, 7 nautical miles off the coast of England, stood an abandoned military platform from World War II. An iron giant perched on 2 concrete legs rising out of the water. Rusty and battered by the winds, it had a flock of seagulls as its only inhabitants. No one needed it. No one, except retired British Army Major Paddy Roy Bates. Paddy was a man of character. He wanted to launch his pirate radio station to play rock and roll, which the BBC disapproved of at that time. But British laws prohibited broadcasting without a license. Paddy looked at the map and realized, the RFS Thule platform is in international waters, which means British laws do not apply there. On Christmas Eve, he took his family, his wife Joan, son Michael, and daughter Penelope, loaded their belongings onto a boat, and landed on the platform. "I declare this territory an independent principality, Sealand," he shouted into the stormy sky. And, as a true prince should, he immediately raised his flag, which he had sewn from old sheets with Joan's help, and declared his wife a princess. The British government initially laughed it off. Oh, the weirdo will play at being Robinson Crusoe and then return. But Paddy had no intention of coming back. He set up a home on the platform, brought in generators, food supplies, and even began issuing passports to his friends. Authorities started to get nervous. They sent a Coast Guard boat to politely ask the prince to vacate the state property. Paddy didn't greet them with bread and salt. Instead, he fired a warning shot into the air from an old rifle. This is the territory of a sovereign state, he declared. Any invasion would be considered an act of war. The British retreated. They didn't want an international scandal over a rusty piece of metal. The matter went to court, and then something incredible happened. The judge, after reviewing the maritime law of that time, ruled, since the platform lies beyond the 3-mile territorial waters limit, it indeed does not fall under British jurisdiction. Sealand had won. Sealand began to live its own life. They established a constitution, a currency, the Sealand dollar, pegged to the US dollar, postal stamps, and even issued noble titles. Anyone interested could become an earl or a baron of Sealand for a small fee. But the story doesn't end there. In 1978, a coup occurred in Sealand. While Paddy was in England for negotiations, a group of Dutch and German businessmen landed on the platform. They arrived by helicopter, supposedly to discuss building a casino, but instead took the prince's son Michael hostage and announced a power takeover. Rather than calling the police upon learning of this, Paddy decided to take matters into his own hands. What kind of police is there in another country? He gathered his friends, hired a helicopter, and staged an assault on his own platform. The landing operation was successful. The invaders surrendered without a fight. PDI raised its flag once again. The captives were released, except for one citizen of Sealand, who betrayed the prince. He was accused of treason and was thrown into a dungeon. Germany demanded the release of its citizen. Britain washed its hands of the matter. This is not our territory. In the end, a German diplomat arrived at the platform to negotiate with Prince Roy. In theory, this shone with participation. It was, in essence, a recognition of his state by another country. The captive was released. Ceylon continued its existence. Petroy Bates passed away in 2012, but his legacy lives on. Now the principality is ruled by his son Michael. The platform still stands in the sea, surviving fires, storms, and attempts at raids. They have their own website, a national football team that plays against other unrecognized countries, and even an online souvenir shop. This story proves that if you believe passionately in something, even a rusty piece of metal in the middle of the sea can become your kingdom, and no one can take it away as long as you are ready to defend your dream. This is story number 8, The Man Who Walked Underneath New York. If you live in a big city, you have probably wondered, what's beneath my feet? Pipes? Wires? Rats? The subway? What if I told you that there might be an entire world down there, created by one man who simply loved to dig? Meet the story of Alfred Eli Beach, an inventor, a dreamer, and perhaps the most elegant mole in history. 1869. New York is choking on traffic. Horses, carriages, mud, noise. The city is growing upwards, but moving around it is becoming impossible. Beach, a young and ambitious editor of Scientific American magazine, looks at this chaos and thinks, I need to go underground. But there's a problem. The city is under the control of the corrupt politician William Boss Tweed. Tweed controls all transportation companies, omnibuses, and streetcars. He is not interested in any subway. Any attempt to build one will be blocked at the root. Beach realizes that obtaining official permission is out of the question, so he decides to be clever. He applies for a permit to build a pneumatic mail system, 2 small tubes for sending letters under Broadway. Boss Tweed laughs and signs the permit. Let him play with his little tubes. It doesn't bother anyone. But Beach wasn't planning to build a mail system. He envisioned something grand. Under the cover of night, in the basement of a clothing store on Broadway, he begins to dig secretly. Along with a group of trusted workers, they remove dirt by the bags, disguising it as trash. They work quietly to avoid raising suspicions from neighbors and the police. In 58 nights, they dug a tunnel 105 feet long, right under the noses of the corrupt officials. But this was not just an ordinary dirty tunnel. Oh no, Beach was an aesthete. He wanted to prove that underground transportation could be luxurious. Imagine, you descend into the basement of an ordinary store, open a door, and step into a fairy tale. Walls made of white bricks. Gas lamps burn in crystal sconces. A grand piano stands in the corner. Yes, a real piano with a musician playing it. A fountain with goldfish splashes merrily. Soft sofas await the visitors. And in the midst of this splendor, a train car. Not dirty, not metal, but wooden, with velvet seats, designed for 22 passengers. But what's most remarkable is the engine. The train car had no wheels with a motor. It was propelled by air. A huge fan created pressure in a pipe, and the car smoothly glided along the tracks to the other end of the tunnel. Then the fan was switched to suction and the car returned. In February 1970, Beach opened his creation to the public. Admission cost 25 cents and crowds flocked in. People couldn't believe their eyes. It was a marvel of technology and comfort. They rode back and forth, listened to music, admired the fish. In the first year, 400,000 people visited the attraction. Boss Twit was furious. He had been outsmarted. A competitor to his tram was built right under his nose. He tried to shut down the subway, sent inspectors, threatened them, but the public was on Beach's side. Victory seemed within reach. Alas, in 1973, a stock market crash happened. Investors went bankrupt. There was no money to continue construction, and soon, Beach himself passed away. The tunnel was abandoned, the entrance sealed, and the luxurious subway was forgotten for many years. It became an urban legend. Only in 1912, while building a modern subway line, did workers break through a wall and gasp. Before them lay the same tunnel, decayed but still showing traces of its former grandeur. A rusty car shell, remnants of the piano, a dried-up fountain. Beach's pneumatic subway never became New York's transportation system, but it showed that even one person with a shovel and a bold idea can challenge the system and create something beautiful. Even if only briefly, it gave people a dream of a future free of traffic and grime. Story number 9. A state anchored in the sands. Picture the heat, not just summer warmth, but that sticky and relentless kind that only happens in the desert. Yellow sand surrounds blue skies and 14 enormous cargo ships frozen in the middle of a lake. They don't move. Their engines are silent. This is not just for one day, or two, or even a month. Listen, this is the story of how 3,000 sailors accidentally created their own state while the rest of the world was caught up in politics. June 1967. The Suez Canal, the shortest route from Europe to Asia. 14 vessels from different countries, Britain, Germany, Poland, Bulgaria, France, and even Czechoslovakia, found peace on their courses. But suddenly, the world around them exploded. A conflict began. The canal was quickly blocked. Old ships were sunk on both sides to prevent passage. The 14 became trapped in a large, bitter lake, a widening of the canal in the middle. The sailors thought, well, we'll just wait a couple of days until everything calms down. They were mistaken. They were stuck there for 8 years. 8. Imagine the situation. You're a sailor. Your job is to sail, but you are standing still. All around you is sand and salty water. At first, there was panic, then despair, and then excitement set in. Since we are going to be here for a while, the captains decided, let's make this place habitable. The sailors established an association by the Great Bitter Lake, but in reality, it was a full-fledged state with its own laws, its own currency, and, remarkably, its own postal service. Wait a minute, this was the 60s. No internet, only letters. They drew stamps on pieces of linoleum and cut out postmarks from corks. And you know what? Postal services around the world recognized those stamps. Letters from the Great Bitter Lake reached recipients in Europe and America. But that's not all. In 1968, when the actual Olympic Games were taking place in Mexico City, the sailors decided to hold their own, right there, on the decks and in the water. The Great Bitter Lake Olympics. They competed in diving, weightlifting, and even soccer. Speaking of soccer, how do you play soccer on a ship? Very easily. The Polish vessel had the largest and flattest deck, which became the official stadium. They held tournaments between teams from different countries. Imagine a desert all around, the blazing sun, and on the deck of a freighter, sailors in their trunks and sneakers excitedly chasing a ball. And on Sundays, one of the British ships held church services. The German ship screened films, and the Bulgarian one had dances under the accordion. The ships stayed so long that their hulls were covered in a thick layer of yellow dust from the desert. Because of this, they were nicknamed the Yellow Fleet. Over 8 years, the crews changed many times. Sailors went home on boats, and others were brought in to replace them, but the spirit of unity remained. It was a place where the Cold War ended on its own. There were no enemies, only neighbors by the lake. Only in 1975 was the canal finally cleared and opened. Of the 14 vessels, only 2 were able to leave under their own power. The others had to be towed. The mechanism simply couldn't withstand such a long period without movement. When the German ship Münsterland finally entered the port of Hamburg, it was greeted by 30,000 people, like heroes, like astronauts returning from another planet. This is a story about how, even in complete isolation, in a dead end, a person remains human. We know how to be friends, play soccer, and write letters, even at the edge of the world when united by a common plight. And sometimes from this plight, the strangest and kindest state in the world is born. Story number 10. Treasures Wrapped in Herring. Have you ever thought that we might never have heard the Four Seasons? Seriously? The most popular classical music in the world, which plays from every device, in advertisements, in elevators, and at train stations, could have simply disappeared, turned to ashes, or become bedding for rabbits. Well, imagine this. In 1926, Italy, the city of Turin, in an old monastic college called San Carlo, the roof leaked. As usual, there was no money for repairs. The monks scraped together and decided, let's sell the old junk from the basement. There are some dusty sheets of music lying around. Maybe some collector will give a couple of lira for them. They called in an expert, Professor Alberto Gentili. He was a quiet man who loved the silence of libraries and the scent of old paper. The professor arrived, descended into the basement, sneezed from the dust, and opened the first drawer. At that moment, his heart must have skipped a beat. Instead of boring church psalms or account ledgers, he saw manuscripts, hundreds, thousands of pages. All of them were written in the same handwriting, swift, nervous, soaring. The name Antonio Vivaldi was on the cover. You might say, so what? He's the great Vivaldi. But no, hold on. At that time, in the early 20th century, Vivaldi was a nobody, a forgotten ghost from the 15th century. His name was only remembered by a few narrow specialists, and even they regarded him as a second-rate composer who wrote dull exercises for the violin. After his death, Vivaldi's music fell out of fashion faster than last year's hat style. It was not performed for nearly 200 years. Gentili began to dig deeper. He found 14 volumes, and then another 13. It resembled the explosion of a supernova. There were operas, sonatas, and those very seasons. But do you know what was most frightening? These brilliant scores miraculously escaped destruction. It turned out that part of the collection once belonged to a count, whose heir simply didn't know what to do with them. The sheets were used as wrapping paper. Honestly, I feel sick at the thought of a precious 16th century manuscript being used to wrap fatty herring or a piece of cheese. Professor Gentili realized that this treasure needed saving, but there was a problem. The monks wanted money immediately, and the government was in no rush to help. Gentili had to become a true detective and adventurer. He found a wealthy patron who purchased the music in memory of his deceased son. But that wasn't all. It turned out that the discovered collection was only half. The other half was with another heir of the same count. Gentili had to knock on doors, persuade, flatter, and seek funds. It was a real ghost hunt. Only after 5 years, in 1930, was the entire collection of Vivaldi gathered at the National Library of Turin. The world gasped. When these notes were first performed on stage, people could not believe their ears. It was vibrant, fresh, bold, as if the music had been written only yesterday, not 2 centuries ago. Thus, one persistent professor from Turin returned an entire universe of sound to humanity. Without him, Vivaldi would have remained just a line in a dusty directory. This is a story about how real treasures often lie hidden beneath layers of dust in basements, and that sometimes you just need to look carefully at what others consider junk. Story number 11. The Post That Wanted to Become a Comet. Have you ever wondered why we still receive letters in our mailboxes instead of catching them with a net in the sky? But admit it, that would be quite a spectacle. And honestly, in history, there was a moment when everything was heading that way. Let's move to 1934. Cold, windy Scotland. The Isle of Harris. The landscape is such that it looks like you could film a movie about lost worlds. Only rocks, sheep, and the gray sea. And amidst this tranquility, a man appears with a wild gleam in his eyes. Gerhard Zucker. Gerhard was a German engineer, and perhaps the greatest optimist of his time. He believed that steamships were a thing of the past. Airplanes were too slow and too expensive. A rocket, he said. That is the future of postal communication. We will deliver letters from one island to another in just a matter of seconds. Picture this. On the shore stands a strange iron contraption resembling a large tin can with a tail. That is the rocket. Zucker is stuffing its belly with letters. 1,200 letters, each with a special rocket postage stamp. The locals gathered around, wrapped in their cloaks, watching with skepticism. But curiosity is stronger than fear. Zucker fusses about, checking the fuse. He is confident in his success. The neighboring island is only a few miles of water away. The rocket is meant to soar into the sky, trace a fiery arc, and gently descend on the other shore. Simply brilliant. Beautiful. And then comes the moment of truth. Zucker brings the flame, hissing, thunder, a huge cloud of smoke in which both the engineer and the onlookers momentarily disappear. But instead of launching towards the stars, the rocket simply explodes right at the start. Boom. Silence. And at that moment, snow begins to fall from the sky. But this is not ordinary snow. These are the very 1,200 letters, charred, smelling of gunpowder. They slowly spiral in the wind, descending onto the sand and into the cold waves of the Atlantic. Sheep, puzzled, chew on the remnants of envelopes. Zucker stood there, covered in soot, watching this paper madness. A failure? It would seem so. A complete disaster. The British Postal Service declared it would never allow this crazy firework to approach government letters again. But do you know what is most surprising? Those letters that were managed to be collected from the sand today are worth a fortune. Collectors and philatelists hunt for these half-burnt envelopes marked as Zucker's rocket mail. They symbolize an era when people were so brave that they tried to harness fire for the sake of a postcard to an ant. Zucker did not give up. He attempted to launch rockets in other countries, but the results were generally the same. Lots of noise, lots of smoke, and very few delivered letters. Yet his dream was not in vain. It was these crazy experiments that ultimately led us to the point where rockets now deliver cargo to orbital stations. Sometimes, for something to truly take off, it must first spectacularly blast off at the start several times. Story number 12. A Green Heart in Glass Confinement. Imagine pouring a glass of water, drinking it down, and that's it. Not a drop left. Not next week, not in a year, not in half a century. Listen, this sounds like a death sentence for any living being, doesn't it? We are used to life being a constant consumption. We need to breathe, drink, and eat every minute, every hour. But nature, it knows how to amaze us in ways that leave scientists scratching their heads. Let's travel to England, 1960, Easter Sunday. An ordinary guy named David Latimer decided to conduct a small experiment. You know, one of those kitchen experiments out of boredom? He took a huge glass bottle. You know, the kind that was once used to transport chemicals or wine. On 10 gallons. Bulbous, transparent, and smelling of dust. David sprinkled a bit of soil at the bottom. With the help of wire, he carefully placed a sprout of Tradescantia inside, a small green defenseless bundle of life. He splashed in a little water, just a cup's worth, and that was it. Well, wait, not everything. He sealed the bottle with a cork. Years turned into decades. The Beatles conquered the world and broke up. A man walked on the moon. Computers, the internet, and mobile phones emerged. And the bottle stood like a shelf in the hallway of the Latimer home. David opened it just once in 1972, simply to add a drop of water, just a little, and sealed it again tightly. Since then, not a single breath of fresh air, not a single watering can. Silence, glass, and life. You might wonder how this is possible. Well, imagine our planet Earth. We too live in a kind of hermetic vessel sailing through space. Inside David's bottle, a microworld has formed, a true miniature ecosystem. The plant breathes, releases oxygen, old leaves wither, fall to the bottom, and decompose into humus, releasing carbon dioxide necessary for the growth of new shoots. Moisture evaporates, settles as droplets on the cold glass walls, and trickles back into the soil. An eternal cycle. Today, this Tradescantia is over 60 years old. It has filled every inch of the bottle. It looks incredible, lush, bright green, and content with life. It requires no gardener, no fertilizers. It needs just one thing: sunlight. It simply stands by the window and captures photons, transforming them into energy. David Latimer is now an elderly man. He sometimes dusts off his bottle and smiles. His experiment proved that life is remarkably resilient. It can find balance even in the tightest of spaces. This glass orb is like a message to all of us. A message that the world is much more complex and wiser than we think. It doesn't always need our intervention. Sometimes, all it takes is to simply not interfere. You know, when you look at this green world through the glass, it brings a sense of peace, as if you've caught a glimpse of eternity. Story number 13. The Stone Strings of a Forgotten Empire. Have you ever wondered if stone can sing? Not just produce some noise in the wind, but sound like a real musical instrument. Purely, clearly, note by note. Honestly, when I first heard about this, I thought it was just a beautiful legend to attract tourists. But reality turned out to be much stranger and more melodic. Let's travel to India, the 15th century, the Vijayanagara Empire. Imagine a plateau strewn with giant boulders, among which a city grew, stunning even the modern architects. Hampi. There stands the Vitala Temple, dedicated to God Vishnu. And this temple is not just a building. It is a gigantic musical instrument made of granite. At the center of the temple are 56 columns, but these are not ordinary supports for the roof. Each is surrounded by thin, intricately carved pillars. There are 7 of them surrounding each main column. And here is where the magic begins. If you gently tap one of those columns with your fingertips or a wooden stick, it will respond. One makes a sound like a flute, another like a drum. The third produces a pure note from the classical Indian scale, do, re, mi. Well, in their rendition, sa, re, ga, ma, pa. Amazing, right? Imagine, hundreds of years ago, real concerts were held under these arches. Musicians didn't bring their instruments with them. The temple itself was the instrument. Sounds resonated, reflected off the walls, and filled the entire space with celestial harmony. Silence, a strike, and the stone comes to life. But the most interesting part happened much later. In the 19th century, when India was a British colony, the British, of course, became intrigued by this phenomenon. They were pragmatic people and didn't believe in the magic of ancient builders. This is impossible, they said. Surely some metallic rods or cavities with bells must be hidden inside these columns. They were so fascinated that they decided to conduct an experiment. Wait, no, it wasn't exactly an experiment. It was more of an act of vandalism driven by pure curiosity. British engineers chose 2 columns and simply sawed them in half. They wanted to peek inside this stone violin, and do you know what they found? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The insides of the columns turned out to be solid chunks of hard granite. No cavities, no hidden mechanisms, just stone. The English stood there, scratching their heads, staring at the remnants. They couldn't explain how the ancient masters managed to select blocks of stone of such density and shape so that they resonated at specific frequencies. Those two sawn columns still stand there today, a monument to human curiosity and the limitations of science against ancient art. Even today, scientists argue whether it's due to a special composition of granite rich in metals or the incredibly precise shaping that is difficult to replicate even with lasers today. When you stand there in the shadows of those columns, it seems as if the stones hold memories of the songs that echoed here 500 years ago. It reminds us that architecture is not just about walls and roofs. It's about the harmony that can be felt with our hands. Story number 14. The bridge that decided to hide from everyone. Have you ever wondered why all bridges are so attention-seeking? I mean, they always try to be the tallest, proudly arching their backs over the water, shimmering with steel cables, proclaiming their greatness. Huge structures that can be seen from miles away. But what if I told you there's a bridge in a quiet corner of Europe that doesn't need anyone's attention? It's so humble that it prefers to remain unseen. Imagine the Netherlands. Not far from the town of Halsteren stands an ancient fort called Roversdijk. It was built back in the 15th century. Back then, people were very concerned about their safety and dug a deep moat around it, filling it with water. The idea was simple. Water is a barrier. It is meant to protect, not invite guests. But centuries passed. In the year 2011, the authorities decided to transform this place into a walking park. And here arose a dilemma: how to let people inside the fort without spoiling its historical appearance. If a typical tall bridge were built, it would ruin the entire atmosphere of the old fortress. It would look like a modern patch on an antique dress, you understand. And then, the architects came up with something brilliant and, to be honest, a little crazy. They decided to build a bridge that does not span above the water. They built a bridge that goes through the water. Imagine walking along a path, approaching a canal, and instead of going up, you begin to go down. The stairs lead you right into the depths of the water, but you don't drown. You walk through a narrow corridor, the walls barely rising above the mirror-like surface. Water on the left, water on the right. It's literally just a few centimeters from your elbows. You can reach out and touch the cold current, but inside the corridor, it is dry and cozy. It was aptly named the Moses Bridge in honor of that biblical hero who parted the waves. From a distance, this bridge is nearly impossible to notice. It seems as though people are simply walking waist-deep in water, as if on some secret pilgrimage. From the shore, you see only a narrow slit in the water that disappears as soon as you take a couple of steps back. You might ask, what about the wood? Isn't it going to rot in a few months? Not at all. Hold on, here science comes into play. The wood for this bridge is a special type of pine that has been treated with some clever eco-friendly compound, making it as hard as stone and completely indifferent to moisture. The architects swear that this underwater passage will last at least 50 years with no hint of mold. But what happens when it rains, or when the water level in the canal rises? Well, everything has been thought through. On both sides of the moat, special pumps are installed. As soon as the water starts getting cheeky and attempts to spill over the edge of the bridge, they kick in and pump out the excess. Engineering elegance hidden from sight. Walking on such a bridge is an unparalleled feeling. It's as if you're in two worlds at once. You're underwater, yet you're dry. You're inside an obstacle, but you're overcoming it. It is silence. It is tranquility. And it is an absolute triumph of human imagination over the usual rules. Sometimes, to become truly great, you don't need to reach upwards. Sometimes, all you need to do is part the water. Story number 15. A forest that will turn into words in a century. Imagine you are planting a tree, an ordinary little spruce. You know it will grow for a long, very long time. You water it. Watch as it reaches towards the sun, and realize one strange thing. You will never see it grown. But what if this tree is not just part of the forest? What if it is a page from a future book, read by people who are not even born yet? Listen, this story is about the most patient project in human history, about the library of the future. Let's move to Norway, 2014. The Nordmarka Forest, very close to Oslo. The air here smells of pine, damp moss, and silence. Right here, the Scottish artist Katie Patterson decided to challenge our habit of expecting everything instantly. You know how we live today. Press a button, get a result. Katie thought that was too boring. She planted 1,000 spruce saplings in this forest. The idea is that these trees will not be disturbed for 100 years. They will simply grow, soak up the rain, sway under the snow, and listen to the birds. And only in 2014 will they be cut down. They will be turned into paper, real paper that smells like the forest. But for what purpose? This is where it gets interesting. Every year, starting in 2014, a special committee chooses one writer deemed most worthy. They are invited to write any book they wish, a novel, a poetry collection, a philosophical essay. But there's a strict condition. No one is allowed to read this text, not the publisher, not the author's family, and not even the committee itself. The author arrives in this Norwegian forest, holds a small ceremony, and hands over the manuscript in a sealed form. The first was Margaret Atwood, the famous writer. She submitted her text and said it felt like sending a message in a bottle through the ocean of time. Honestly, I think that's an incredibly bold act for any creator. To write something grand and know that in your lifetime, no one will say to you, "Bravo," or "That's a flop." All these manuscripts are kept in a new library in Oslo. They built a special room there. It's called the Room of Silence. The walls are made of layers of wood cut from that very forest when they cleared space for new saplings. It has soft light, is cozy, and very quiet. In the walls of this room, there are glass boxes containing the manuscripts. Each has the author's name and year, but they are locked. The keys to these boxes will be given to readers only 100 years after the project begins, in 2014. Imagine that moment. Distant descendants will come to the forest, cut down the grown spruces, publish the books, and finally discover what we wanted to tell them. This is an act of absolute trust. We believe that in a century, forests will still exist, that people will still read printed books, and that the city of Oslo will still be here. Although, wait, we don't just believe. We are giving them reason to preserve all of this. This project is not about literature. It is a project about hope. About the fact that life continues beyond our little now. Story number 16. The Loneliest Singer in the Abyss. Imagine absolute silence. Deep underwater, where sunlight surrenders and dissolves into darkness, sound is everything. It is sight. It is touch. It is life itself. In this deep blue abyss, creatures communicate over vast distances, sending their songs through hundreds of kilometers of ocean. And usually, they get a response. But honestly, in this story, everything went differently. The year is 1989. The Cold War has not yet ended, but it is starting to fade. The United States Navy was closely listening to the ocean at that time. They set up a complex network of hydrophones to capture the sound of the propellers of Soviet submarines. But instead of the clanking of metal and the whirring of motors, they heard this strange sound, rhythmic, deep, resembling the voice of a living creature, but completely wrong. Listen, this was a whale, but a whale that sang at a frequency of 52 hertz. For us, 52 hertz is a low, rumbling sound, but in the whale world, it is incredibly high. Blue whales typically sing at frequencies ranging from 10 to 20 hertz, while fin whales sing around 20. These are deep, powerful vibrations that travel across the ocean. But this guy, he sang in an entirely different range. A scientist named Bill Watkins started tracking this strange signal. He listened to it year after year, from 1990 to 19, decade after decade. He simply named it 52. Just imagine his life. He swims through the Pacific Ocean from the shores of California to the Aleutian Islands. He sings his song. He searches for kin. He calls out, "I am here, where are you?" But no one hears him. Not because his voice is quiet. No, it is powerful, like that of the largest blue whale. He is unheard because other whales simply aren't tuned into that frequency. It's as if he speaks a language that no one else understands anymore. To the rest of the ocean, he is a ghost, an invisible giant wandering alone for years. He swims past pods of other whales. He might be just a few kilometers away from them, but they remain blind and deaf to his call. He is the loneliest being on the planet. He has no family. He has no friends. He has only his voice and the endless blue expanse of water. You might ask why he is like this, but scientists still debate. Some think he is a rare hybrid of two different species. Others believe he is a congenital anomaly that made him unique. And some think he may be the last representative of an ancient species that we have yet to discover. But do you know what is most astonishing about this story? Despite years of absolute solitude, he did not fall silent. Bill Watkins tracked him until his death in 2004. The whale continued to sing. He kept going. He didn't give up on his journey. His voice became slightly deeper with age, as is the case with humans, but he persistently continued to send out his 52 hertz into the darkness. Many people learning about this story began to see this whale as a symbol of hope. We too sometimes feel that we are speaking a language that no one understands. It seems to us that we are alone in our ocean, but this whale just swims on. He keeps singing. And by the way, in recent years there have been news that quicken the heartbeat. Recently, other groups of researchers detected a similar signal at the other end of the ocean, a frequency of 52 hertz. Could there now be two of them? We don't know for sure yet, but the very thought that somewhere out there in the abyss, lonely voices might finally meet makes this world feel a bit cozier. Sometimes you just need to keep singing your song, even if it seems that no one hears you. Who knows? Maybe right now someone else is tuning their receiver to your frequency. Story number 17. The Underground Eden of a Sicilian Immigrant. Listen, have you ever felt that everything is against you? Well, literally everything. The weather, the ground under your feet, the circumstances. Most of us, in such a situation, would simply throw up our hands, sigh, and go look for another spot in the sun. But the hero of this story decided that if the sun was too harsh, he would just hide from it, but do so beautifully. Let's travel to California, to the city of Fresno, at the beginning of the 20th century, in 1901. Imagine this place, a sun-scorched plain, dust and heat so intense it feels as if the air could be sliced with a knife. In this inhospitable environment arrives Baldassare Forestier, a young Sicilian who had dreamed all his life of growing citrus. He invested all his savings in a plot of land, 70 acres. He envisioned thick lemon groves, shade, and the scent of flowers. But when Baldassare took a shovel and tried to dig, a loud clink rang out as metal struck stone. It turned out that beneath the thin layer of dust lay a hard pan, a cemented layer of clay and sand, as solid as concrete. Nothing grew on it. It was impossible to plow. Frankly, it was a disaster. His family wrote to him from Sicily urging, "Come back, kid, you bought a piece of desert." But Baldassare was not an ordinary man. He was stubborn, very stubborn. To escape the scorching heat, he dug a small pit, covered it with boards, and spent the night there. And lo and behold, below ground it was cool, quiet, and somehow peaceful. Then a crazy idea struck him. If trees couldn't grow above, they would grow below. He took a pickaxe, a shovel, and a crowbar. He had no blueprints, no architecture education, not even any helpers, just 2 hands and one dream. He began to dig. Day after day, year after year, for 40 years. Imagine that. 40 years of his life spent underground, gnawing away at the rocky crust. But wait, he wasn't just digging a hole. He was building an underground castle. By the mid-20s, an entire labyrinth sprawled under his plot. There were bedrooms, a kitchen, a library, a living room with a fireplace, but the most incredible were the courtyards. Baldassare excavated vast rooms without roofs that from above looked like mere holes in the ground. To the bottoms of these courtyards, he brought fertile soil and planted trees, lemons, oranges, grapefruits. They grew within the earth. Their tops stretched towards the light, but never emerged from the pit. Baldassare created a unique microclimate. It was warm in winter and cool in summer. He even developed a variety of tree that bore 7 different types of citrus simultaneously, just out of curiosity. When neighbors peeked in, they couldn't believe their eyes. Above was a lifeless desert, while below lay a true Eden. Vines hung from the ceilings, cool corridors paved with river stones, and the scent of citrus groves wafted through the underground halls. Baldassare Forestier died in 1946. He left behind over 10 acres of underground gardens. He was never wealthy. He didn't build a skyscraper, but he proved that if reality doesn't suit you, you can dig out your own little universe where it's always cool and fragrant with lemons. This is a story about how obstacles are merely an invitation to change your perspective. Sometimes, to see the garden, you need to look not at the sky, but under your feet. This is story number 18, The Ship in the Sands and the River That Changed Its Mind. Tell me, have you ever lost something truly significant? Like, for example, your car keys or an umbrella on a bus. It's frustrating, isn't it? But imagine people who one day woke up and realized they had lost a river. A whole huge turbulent river, which was their only source of life. Let's travel back to the 19th century. The United States of America, Nebraska, 1865. At that time, the Missouri River was the main highway for settlers. Mighty paddle boats traveled on it, carrying gold, furs, supplies, and people seeking fortune in the Wild West. And there, sailing on this river, was a beautiful steamboat named Bertrand. 250 tons of cargo and dozens of passengers. Its holds contained everything needed for life in new towns, from boxes of mercury for gold mining to bottles of sparkling champagne and women's shoes in the latest Parisian fashion. But the Missouri is a treacherous river. It changed its course more often than a capricious beauty changes outfits. Hidden beneath the water was snags and sandbanks that had been in different places just yesterday. Bertrand ran aground on one of those snags. The hull cracked and water rushed in. Fortunately, all passengers were saved. The ship slowly sank to the bottom, its masts sticking out of the water for some time. Then the unbelievable happened. The river simply disappeared. Over several decades, the Missouri, obeying some internal rhythm, shifted its course a good mile away, and the place where Bertrand sank became buried in mud, sand, and dirt. Grass grew on top, then bushes, and soon entire fields of corn. The ship was buried beneath a 10-foot layer of soil deep within a farmer's field. 100 years passed. Bertrand turned into a legend, an old tale believed only by local treasure hunters. But in 1968, two enthusiasts, Sam Corbina and Jesse Purcell, decided that the legend was worth investigating. They used maps from the 19th century and modern metal detectors, and guess what? They found it, right in the middle of a cornfield, where there wasn't even a hint of water. When the excavations began, the archaeologists gasped. It turned out that the layer of dirt and complete absence of oxygen created perfect conditions for preservation. It was a true time capsule. Imagine, they opened the hold, and there were boxes of canned goods that looked like they had been packed yesterday. Bottles of wine, tools, clothing, even pocket watches that seemed like they just needed to be wound up and they would work. This was the most complete and incredible assemblage of household items from the time of the Civil War in the United States. They found 3,000 pairs of shoes, boxes of dill pickles that were still green, and even mercury, which still happily rolled around in its steel containers. Today, at that site, in DeSoto National Wildlife Refuge, there is a museum. You walk in and see the enormous remains of a ship standing in the desert, hundreds of meters from the nearest water. This is a spectacle that makes us reflect on how changeable our planet is. What may seem unshakable today, like the shore, the river, or the road, could tomorrow be buried under layers of time. But wait, it's not just about time. It's about the fact that we always leave traces behind us, and sometimes, nature gently preserves them for us so that in 100 years, we can look into the eyes of our past selves. Story number 19. The candy bar that heard the future. Have you ever wondered how often great discoveries arise from mere carelessness or a sense of hunger? To be honest, I intended to tell you about a great con artist and the Eiffel Tower, as I promised earlier. But as I looked through my archives, I found that story had already been recorded there, twice. It seems this guy even tricked me. So let's change the subject. Let's talk about something sweeter, yet no less explosive. Imagine the year 1945. Massachusetts, the laboratory of a certain company. The air is filled with the smell of ozone, machine oil, and seriousness. Huge humming cabinets tangled with wires are everywhere. These are magnetrons, the hearts of the radar systems that helped win wars. And among all this scientific splendor walks Percy Spencer, a self-taught man, a person who didn't even finish elementary school but knew more about electricity than any academic. He was a practical man. He loved it when everything worked. That day, Percy was standing next to a working magnetron. Just a regular work moment. The device was humming, the lights were glowing, and electrons were racing wildly in the vacuum. And suddenly, Percy felt something strange in his trouser pocket. You know that unpleasant feeling when something starts to warm up slowly and then turns into a sticky puddle? "Oh," he muttered, reaching into his pocket. There was a candy bar, an ordinary peanut bar, but within seconds it had turned into a hot, gooey mass. But wait. The room was cool. Percy wasn't standing by a stove. He was just next to the radar. Any other person in his place would have cursed and gone to clean their pants. But Percy was different. He paused. Silence. The hum of the device and chocolate on his fingers. He realized that the invisible waves had done what normally takes 10 minutes in an oven. They struck right at the sugar and cocoa molecules. Percy decided to test his theory, but not with chocolate. He sent an assistant for a bag of corn kernels. Picture this scene. Serious scientists in white coats, scattering corn on a table in front of a secret military device. A flick of the switch. 1 second. 2 seconds. And suddenly, bang! The laboratory filled with the sounds of tiny explosions. White, fluffy popcorn began flying around the room, bouncing off the ceiling and burying intricate blueprints. It was a triumph, a small culinary chaos in the midst of high technology. The next day, Percy brought a raw egg into the lab. He made a small hole in it and positioned it right in front of the magnetron's horn. One of his colleagues decided to take a closer look to see what would happen, and bam! The egg exploded right in his face. Egg yolk on the glasses, egg white on the tie. Science, as they say, requires sacrifices. Thus, from one melted chocolate and a ruined suit, the first microwave oven in the world was born. The first model was called Radar Range. It stood as tall as a person and weighed 340 kilograms. It cost $5,000, a huge amount of money back then. It was purchased only for restaurants and military ships. But Percy Spencer wasn't seeking fame. He just wanted food to cook faster. This story reminds us that sometimes you need to pay attention to what you have in your pocket. Great things are often disguised as ordinary, sticky messes. The most important thing is not to rush to throw away ruined chocolate. Story number 20. A city hidden in one building. Listen, have you ever dreamed of going to work, the store, and the movies without wearing a coat and boots? Well, even if it's freezing cold outside and the wind is tearing roofs off. Honestly, for most of us, this sounds like a fantastic tale about colonists on Mars. But on our planet, there is a place where this is a commonplace reality. No fantasy, just mountains, snow, and one very big house. Imagine Alaska, the small Prince William Sound, a place called Whittier. Getting here is an adventure in itself. You have only 2 ways to arrive, either by sea or through one single 4-kilometer tunnel. Moreover, this tunnel is one way. Half the year it operates in one direction, half the year it doesn't. Just kidding, of course. Every 30 minutes the direction changes, and at night it's completely locked up. Silence, cold, wind whistling. In this strange, cut off from the world place live people, about 200 of them. And you know what's most surprising? They rarely go outside, not because they are afraid or lazy. They simply don't need to. The entire city of Whittier fits into one single building. It's called Begich Towers. 14 stories of gray concrete. Once, it was a military barracks built in 1957, but when the military moved out, the building didn't become empty. It turned into a vertical city. Well, imagine this. You wake up in your apartment on the 10th floor, brush your teeth, drink coffee, then take the elevator down to the second floor. There's the post office. Need to buy milk? A few more floors down and you're in a fully stocked grocery store. Got a sore throat? There's a small clinic in the same building. Want to pray? A cozy church is set up in the basement. Everything you need is here. A police station, a laundromat, city hall, and even a small hotel for the rare tourists who dare to drive through the tunnel. And what about the children? Here's the interesting part. The school is in a neighboring building, but to prevent students from fighting through snowdrifts that can be taller than humans, a warm, underground tunnel has been dug between the house and the school. Children go to class in their home slippers and t-shirts. Although, wait, don't think this is some kind of voluntary prison. The residents of Whittier love their home very much. In Begich Towers, there's an atmosphere of one big, sometimes too noisy family. If someone runs out of sugar, there's no need to call anyone. You simply step into the hallway and knock on the neighbor's door. Here, everyone knows each other. You can't just walk past a neighbor without saying hello. "Listen, John, you forgot to turn off the television again yesterday," someone might tell you in the elevator. This is life under a microscope, but at the same time, it offers absolute safety. In a town where a storm can rage outside with winds of 120 kilometers per hour, the walls of an old barrack feel like the most reliable shelter in the world. When you look at this building from afar, against the backdrop of majestic mountains and glaciers, it appears small and defenseless. But inside, it beats the heart of the city. This is a story of how people manage to adapt to the harshest conditions, turning cold isolation into warm neighborliness. Sometimes, to feel part of something bigger, you don't need to build huge metropolises. It's enough to just have one reliable elevator and neighbors who are always ready to share sugar. This is story number 21, The Boy Who Read the Jungle by the Stars. Have you ever noticed that adults sometimes complicate everything too much? We build huge telescopes, write dissertations, argue at conferences, but sometimes we overlook what's right in front of us, or hanging directly above our heads. Honestly, this story is my personal favorite because it proves that curiosity and Google Maps can be stronger than decades of academic expeditions. Let's travel to Canada, Quebec, in the year 2012. Imagine an ordinary teenager's room. There are textbooks, empty cups, a laptop on the desk. Sitting at that desk is William Godouri. He is only 15 years old. William was obsessed with Mayan culture. He was troubled by one question that even established scholars couldn't clearly answer. Why did the Mayans build their cities in such strange locations? You see, people usually settle near rivers, on fertile plains, or by the sea. But the Mayans constructed their massive stone metropolises deep within impenetrable jungles on dry highlands far from water. This doesn't make sense, William thought, as he studied a map of the Yucatan. Then a wild idea came to him. What if they weren't looking at the ground, but at the sky? Wait, not just looking. William hypothesized that the Mayans built their cities to exactly replicate a map of the constellations. He found an ancient Mayan codex that described 22 of their constellations. He overlaid the map of these constellations onto the map of Mexico and Guatemala. And that's where the wonders began. It turned out that the brightest stars perfectly matched the locations of the largest cities. 117 points aligned perfectly. It was beautiful, but that wasn't enough for William. He found the 23rd constellation. It had 3 stars, but on the map of the Earth, there were only 2 cities corresponding to 2 of the stars. There was no third point. Where the bright star of this constellation should have been, the map showed only green emptiness, virgin jungles of the state of Campeche. William wasn't afraid of looking foolish. He contacted the Canadian Space Agency. Imagine the serious faces of engineers when a 15-year-old schoolboy approached them with a request. "Please, give me satellite images of this specific area in the jungle. I think there's a city hidden there." And you know what? They helped him. It seems that astronauts and scientists also enjoy a good mystery. They provided high-resolution images from NASA and the Japanese Space Agency. William began examining the photographs, pixel by pixel, greenery, greenery, shadows from trees, and suddenly, a clear geometric shape appeared, a square. Beneath layers of ancient trees lay something that nature could not create. It was a pyramid, approximately 30 meters high, along with around 30 buildings surrounding it. William named the lost city Kachi, which translates to fire mouth. It turned out to be one of the 5 largest cities ever built by the Maya. It had been hidden from people for thousands of years until a matchmaker in Canada decided to connect the stars with lines. Although some archaeologists still argue about the details, the global scientific community was stunned. A 15-year-old boy made a discovery using only logic and open data. This is a story about how the boundaries of knowledge exist only in our minds, and sometimes, in order to find treasures on Earth, you just need to take a closer look at the sky. Story number 22. The runner who stayed for tea for half a century. Have you ever felt so awkward that you just wanted to disappear? You know, literally fall through the ground, so no one would ask any more questions? We've all been in situations like that. Said something silly on a date, or walked through the wrong door. But the hero of today's story took the art of awkward exits to a whole new level. He didn't just leave, he vanished from the official records for a whole 54 years. Let's travel to Sweden. Stockholm, 1912, the 5th Summer Olympics. Imagine that day, July 14th. The heat is unbearable, 32 degrees in the shade. For northern Sweden, this is pure hell. Athletes are lined up at the marathon starting line. Among them is a young Japanese man, Shizo Kanekuri. He was the hope of his country. Shizo traveled to Stockholm for 18 days, first by ship, then across Russia on the Trans-Siberian Railway. Picture it, almost 3 weeks on a train, trying to train in the narrow aisles of the carriages. He arrived exhausted but determined. The starting gun fired. The runners surged forward. But the weather was merciless. Athletes were collapsing one after another. Almost half of the participants dropped out due to heat stroke. At the 30th kilometer, Shizo Kanekuri felt the world around him begin to swirl. His legs turned to jelly. His head was buzzing. He realized that just a few more steps and he would fall onto the scorching asphalt. Then he saw a garden. A cozy little garden by a small country house. A Swedish family was sitting there, peacefully enjoying cold lemonade. With great effort, Shizo made his way to them. The homeowners gasped when they saw the half-conscious Olympian in his white uniform. They sat him down in a chair, gave him water, fed him, and truly showed the utmost Swedish hospitality. Sid was so grateful and so crushed by his defeat that he simply fell asleep. He slept for several hours. When he woke up, the sun was already setting. The marathon had long ended. The winners were awarded, while he was being searched for. The Swedish police had already combed the area tirelessly. Kanekuri felt so ashamed that he couldn't think of anything better than to quietly slip away, get to the port, and leave for Japan on the first ship. He didn't say a word to the officials. Silence. A pause. A quiet departure with a hint of Japanese flair. In Sweden, Shizo Kanekuri was officially declared missing. His name hung on the lists of the missing for decades. People spun wild theories. Perhaps he got lost in the woods? Maybe he was kidnapped. Meanwhile, Shizo was calmly living in Japan, working as a geography teacher and even continuing to run marathons back home. 50 years passed. In 1967, Swedish journalists accidentally discovered that the missing marathon runner was alive, well, and taking care of grandchildren in Kumamoto Prefecture. Swedish television immediately contacted him and made an offer that was impossible to refuse. Sid, would you like to complete your race? At the age of 75, Kanekuri returned to Stockholm to that very stadium. He laced up his sneakers again and, to the applause of thousands, crossed the finish line. His final time totaled 54 years, 8 months, 6 days, 5 hours, 32 minutes, and 20 seconds. the longest marathon in human history. It was a long journey, the old man smiled after finishing. But during that time, I managed to get married, raise 6 children, and see 10 grandchildren. It was worth it. Though wait, this story isn't about slow running, it's about finishing. It's never too late. Even if your coffee break lasts for half a century, a sense of duty and dignity transcends time. This kind and somewhat humorous tale reminds us that our mistakes are not the end of the road. They are simply a long pause before a triumphant finale. Story number 23. The Iron Dragon and the Castle of One Man. Listen, I promised you a story about a man who built a cathedral, but when I delved into my deepest archives, I realized that the cathedrals usually talked about pale in comparison to this place. This is not just a building. It's a cry of individuality frozen in stone. Honestly, when you hear this, you'll understand that one person with a shovel and stubbornness is a formidable force, much stronger than any construction company. Let's move to the mountains of Colorado, the late 60s, 1969 to be exact. Imagine a guy named Jim Bipp. He's 25. He just bought a small piece of land in the woods for $450. All he wanted was to build a cozy family cottage for himself and his wife, a small family nest. Jim began collecting stones, regular river stones that were right at his feet. He stacked them, applied cement, and the wall grew. Then his father, looking at all this, jokingly said, "Hey Jim, this looks more like a castle than a house." And you know what? These words became a spark. It was as if Jim had a moment of clarity. He thought, a castle? Why not? Instead of a cottage, he began building a fortress. 78th. Years went by. Just imagine the scale of this madness. Jim Bishop built this enormous castle all by himself. No cranes, no blueprints, no architectural education, no hired workers, absolutely no one. Just his hands, his back, and a belief that he was creating something great. He carried the stones himself, forged the iron structures himself. Today, Bishop's Castle is a monster, standing 16 stories tall. There are huge towers with spires that sway in the wind. Jim says this is intentional for flexibility. There are iron bridges suspended over the abyss. But the most insane part is the dragon's head. Jim found an old stainless steel tank at a scrapyard. He cut it, bent it, and welded it to one of the towers in the shape of a massive dragon's head. And it's not just a decoration. He connected it to the chimney. When there is a fire in the castle, the dragon breathes real fire and smoke. In the Rockies of Colorado, a fire-breathing stone castle. Isn't that a wonder? Jim has been building it for over 50 years. Every single day he says that the castle is his way of telling the world, no, no to rules, no to boredom, no to fear. He calls it a monument to freedom. When you stand at the base of this giant, you feel uneasy. It seems alive. It's incorrect, lopsided, wild, but it has more soul than all the modern skyscrapers combined. This is a story about how one person can change the landscape of an entire mountain if he simply refuses to stop. Jim is still there. If you visit, you'll see him in work clothes with a face covered in stone dust. He's still carrying stones. He's still building. Sometimes, to leave a mark in history, you don't need millions. You just need to start stacking stones, one on top of the other, and ignore those who say that a cottage is the best you can do. Story number 24. The room where you become the loudest sound in the universe. Listen, have you ever wondered how absolute silence sounds? You know, complete silence. No hum of cars outside, no chirping of birds, not even the rustle of your own breath. We are accustomed to noise. It's our cocoon. We live in it from the moment we are born until the last second. But there is a place on our planet where this cocoon is torn apart, and you are left alone with something very strange. Let's travel to the city of Minneapolis, to the Orfield Laboratories. It is here that there is an anechoic chamber, which is officially recognized by the Guinness World Records as the quietest place on Earth. Imagine a room. The walls are 1 meter thick, made of concrete and steel. and inside it is lined with enormous fiberglass pyramids. They absorb 99.99% of all sounds. It's not just quiet, it's empty. When you step inside and the heavy doors close, something frightening happens. Your ear, used to picking up signals from the outside, suddenly realizes there are no signals. It's a vacuum. And then your brain begins to do what it does best. He begins turning the volume up to the maximum. Well, silence and silence, you might say. What's the problem? Here's the thing. After a couple of minutes in this room, you start hearing things you shouldn't hear at all. You hear the sound of your heart beating, loudly, like a drum in the spirit. You hear your lungs filling with air, and that sound is reminiscent of the rustling of enormous furs. But the most incredible part is that you start to hear your blood flowing through your veins, how your intestines work, and how your joints creak with the slightest movement. In an anechoic chamber, you become the source of noise yourself. You are the loudest thing in that room. Although, wait, that's not the hardest part. In this chamber, people lose their sense of spatial orientation. Do you understand? We determine the position of our bodies, including by the echo that reflects off walls and objects. In the Orfield room, there is no echo at all. After 10 minutes, many begin to feel dizzy. After 20, hallucinations start. The brain, deprived of familiar stimuli, begins to create its own sounds. The record for staying in this room in complete darkness is just 45 minutes. No one has lasted longer. People start to panic. They feel as if the walls are pressing down on them, even though the room is quite spacious. This is absolute isolation from the outside world, turning into a test of your psyche. Scientists use this room to test technology, from NASA spacecraft to hearing aids. But for the average person, this place is a reminder of how tightly we are connected to the world around us. We are beings of sound. Without it, we start to lose ourselves. Sometimes, to truly hear yourself, you need to enter a room where there isn't a single sound. But be careful. What you hear there may not be pleasant. Story number 25. The heavenly supermarket that operates on a schedule. Listen, have you ever wondered what it would be like if nature suddenly decided to engage in charity? I mean, seriously, no conditions or fine print in the contract. We're used to food coming from the grocery store, from the garden, or, at the very least, from a delivery service. But in one corner of our planet, people have been simply walking outside with baskets when the sky starts to get angry, for more than 100 years. And it's not a metaphor. Let's travel to Honduras, in the Yoro department, a city lost among green mountains and thick mists. Usually, it's like everywhere else. Hot, the cries of parrots, the smell of coffee. But every year, somewhere between May and June, something happens that leaves meteorologists from all over the world helplessly throwing up their hands. Imagine, the sky suddenly turns black, becoming dark as in twilight. A storm begins, but not just a drizzle, but a real downpour with thunder and lightning. A wall of water so thick that you can't see your own outstretched hand. The townspeople hide in their homes. They close the shutters, they wait. And then, silence, a pause, a hit. The rain stops as suddenly as it began. People head out into the streets, and do you know what they see? The entire earth, all the roads, all the fields, everything is covered with thousands of tiny, living, silvery fish. They jump in the puddles, they sparkle in the sun. Honestly, if I hadn't seen the photographs, I would have thought this was just an old fisherman's tale. But it actually happens every single year for the last 160 years. You might ask, where did they come from? Well, opinions vary on that. The locals have a very beautiful legend. In 1850, a Spanish missionary, Father José Manuel Subirana, arrived in this region. He saw how poorly the people lived and how they struggled for food. He went into the mountains and prayed for 3 days and 3 nights, asking God to perform a miracle to feed the hungry. And when he descended into the valley, the first fish rain began. Since then, Father Subirana has been regarded as a saint, and fish are considered his gift. But scientists, of course, tend to be a dull bunch. They prefer formulas. They proposed a theory about tornadoes, claiming that strong winds suck fish from the Atlantic Ocean, carry them over the mountains for 200 kilometers, and then gently release them onto the ground. But hold on, why then does the tornado only choose one type of fish, and why does it do this strictly on a schedule in the same spot? There's another theory, a rather strange one. Some researchers believe that this fish lives in underground rivers beneath the city. When heavy rains start, the caves overflow, and streams of water simply wash the fish to the surface through small openings in the soil. But you know what's funniest? The locals don't care at all about the theories. For them, it's a celebration. The WWII Festival. They collect fish by the bucket, fry it, treat their neighbors, and sing songs. This is a story about how a miracle isn't always something that can't be explained. Sometimes a miracle is simply something that happens at the right time, making life just a little bit easier. The world is full of mysteries, and sometimes they fall right onto our heads, reminding us that nature is much more imaginative than any science fiction writer. Story number 26. A tree that decided standing still was just too boring. Listen, have you ever wondered why we consider trees, well, furniture? Natural, of course, but still. We're used to the idea that if an oak tree grows here, it will still be here 100 years from now, rooted, immovable, true to its patch of earth. Honestly, it seems to us like a law of nature. But what if I told you that deep in the jungles of Ecuador, there are some who completely disagree? Imagine a pool in the Amazon. It's the 1990s, surrounded by dense, humid tropical forests. The air here is so thick it feels like you could drink it. And amidst this green chaos lives the Socratia exoryza palm, or, as the local elders call it, the walking palm. When you first see it, you feel a little uneasy. You see, it doesn't have the usual trunk that goes straight into the ground. Instead, the tree stands on dozens of tall, strong roots that jut out of the earth like stilts, or the legs of a giant insect. The entire trunk hangs in the air, supported by these strange props. But what's most amazing isn't how it looks, but what it does. Well, picture this. You come to the jungle, find this palm, set a stake nearby, and leave. Come back after a year, and guess what? The stake is in place, but the palm tree is gone. It is moved, shifted a couple of meters to the side. Nonsense, you might say. Trees don't walk. But that's not true. Hold on a moment. Biologists have debated this phenomenon for a long time. It turns out that the Socratia exoryza is a true strategist. In the jungles, there is a constant brutal battle for sunlight. If a palm tree falls under the shadow of a larger neighbor, it doesn't accept its fate. It starts to take action. The tree senses where the light is stronger and begins to grow new roots in that direction, toward the brightness of the sun. These new roots dig into the soil, becoming stronger, while the old roots, left in the shadow, start to wither and die. There is silence, a pause, a movement. Gradually, the entire tree relocates to its new supports. It literally steps from one spot to another. On average, in a year, such a palm can cover about 20 meters. It's not a sprint, of course, but for a plant, it's a true journey around the globe. Throughout its life, it can entirely change its address, moving to the other side of the forest glade in search of better fortune. You know, when scientists from the Paleontological Institute in Slovakia began studying this phenomenon, they were amazed. It turns out that the palm behaves almost like an animal. It has a purpose. It has a method for achieving that purpose. And it has infinite patience. Although some grumpy botanists say this cannot be called walking in the full sense of the word, the locals couldn't care less. For them, the Socratia is a symbol of life that never gives up. If conditions aren't right for you, simply grow new legs and go where it's better. Brilliant, isn't it? This story is about how even the most steadfast rules, like the idea that a tree should stand where it was born, have their exceptions. Nature always finds a loophole. Sometimes, to survive, you just need to not be afraid to leave old roots behind and take the first, even if very slow, step toward the light. Story number 27. The old lady who refuses to fade away. Listen, have you ever noticed that things are made to be somewhat fragile these days? Honestly, Buy a kettle, it'll burn out in a year. A phone will start to lag in 2. It feels like each item has tiny invisible clocks built into them, counting down to their breakdown. Scientists call this planned obsolescence. But in a small town in California, there is an item that seems to have never heard of such rules. Let's travel to the town of Livermore, to fire station number 6. Picture a typical garage for fire trucks, the smell of rubber, polished metal. And there, right under the ceiling, hangs a little dim light bulb. It barely glows, just 4 watts. It doesn't light up the room, it merely burns. But do you know what's special about it? It has been burning for 124 years. It was installed in 1901. Just think, when it was lit for the first time, horse-drawn carriages were still on the streets. There were no airplanes, no television, no internet. The world has changed beyond recognition. Empires have collapsed, skyscrapers have been erected, humans have landed on the moon, yet this little glass bulb continues to shine. It is called the century lamp, and it challenges the modern world of consumption. It has outlasted dozens of fire chiefs. It has witnessed thousands of emergency calls. It has been relocated from building to building multiple times, and each time, firefighters trembled with fear. What if the filament breaks right now? When it was moved to a new location in 1976, it felt like a special operation. The lamp was not unscrewed from its socket, as they feared damaging the threads. The wires were simply cut, and the bulb was transported with police escorts and sirens blaring. The entire move took 22 minutes. And throughout this time, the lamp was not lit. The firefighters swear that those were the longest 22 minutes of their lives. Although, wait a minute, you might ask, what is the secret? Scientists speculated for a long time, taking samples of the glass, examining the composition of the filament. It turned out that it was made by engineer Adolph Shea, a competitor of the great Thomas Edison. The filament in this lamp is 8 times thicker than normal. It is made of carbon, not tungsten. It operates on very low power and hardly heats up. But there's another version, a more human one. In the 1920s, light bulb manufacturers from around the world gathered in Geneva and formed a secret cartel called Phoebus. They agreed that light bulbs should not last too long, a maximum of 1,000 hours. If a bulb lasts forever, who will buy a new one? So, the century lamp from Livermore was made before this conspiracy. It stands as a testament to an era when things were made with integrity, to serve people, not to generate profit for corporations. Today, this light bulb has its own official website, a round-the-clock webcam in case it does go out, and thousands of fans around the globe. Every year, the residents of Livermore celebrate it. It has become a symbol of reliability, stability, and good old-fashioned engineering. You know, when you look at its dim orange glow, it warms the soul. In a world where everything breaks and changes, there is something that remains the same. A small point of light that refuses to comply with the laws of economics and time. Sometimes, to become a legend, you don't need to shine brightly. You just need to endure for a very long time. Story number 28. A woman who broke through a mountain with sheer will. Listen, have you ever felt trapped? Not confined to a room or an elevator, but in life itself, when it seems an insurmountable wall stands between you and the rest of the world? To be honest, for the residents of the village of Mahua in China's Guizhou province, this was not a metaphor. It was reality. A mountainous, granite, relentless reality. Imagine this place. The mountains here resemble giant dragon teeth that pierce the clouds. The village is located in a deep hollow. The only way out is to climb over steep cliffs. To simply carry a bag of rice to the nearest market, men had to spend 5 hours. 5 hours up, 5 hours down. A life of isolation, silence, fog, and complete hopelessness. In 1999, the government promised to build a road, but the mountains proved too strong. The budget was too small. The project was shut down. And then Dan Inseon stepped onto the scene. An ordinary woman, a mother, a farmer's wife. She didn't have an engineering degree. She had never held dynamite before. But she had something the officials didn't have. She was tired of watching her children grow up trapped. If the mountain won't let us through, We'll go through it, she said. Neighbors laughed. But you understand how it goes. Dan, are you crazy? It's a rock. You want to dig a tunnel with a shovel? But she wouldn't listen. She sold her pigs, all her wealth, to buy the first tools. Hammers, chisels, a little bit of powder. Wait, she didn't even know how to properly blast the rock. She learned as she went along. She began to dig alone. Imagine that picture. A small woman, against the backdrop of a huge gray mountain, hitting a stone with a hammer. Tap, tap, tap. 1 centimeter a day. 2 centimeters. People looked at her with pity, but after a month, her husband joined her. 3 months later, another pair of neighbors joined in. They worked in the dark by kerosene lamps, breathing in the stone dust that clogged their lungs. 13 years of her life this woman spent inside the mountain. There was a moment in 2001 when they almost gave up. They had dug about 30 meters, but hit a layer of rock so hard that the tools simply broke. Dan Insian then stepped out of the cave, sat on the ground, and no, she didn't cry. She went to town, found an old retired engineer, and convinced him to be their consultant for free, just for food and the promise that his name would be remembered. In 2011, it happened. The last hit of the chisel, and at the end of the dark corridor, dazzling sunlight flashed. They had broken through a tunnel 314 feet long. It wasn't a smooth highway. It was a rough, uneven hole in the rock, but through it, for the first time in the history of Mahua, a truck could pass. The village's life changed within a week. Electricity came, doctors arrived. Children could go to school in the neighboring village, taking 15 minutes instead of 5 hours. Dan Insian became a legend. She is called the modern Mulan, but she herself says she just wanted her grandchildren to see the world without scraping their legs on the stones. This story reminds us that any mountain is just a collection of stones. And if you have enough stubbornness to hit them every day, one day the stone will give in. The main thing is not to drop the hammer, even if sparks fly in your face. Story number 29. The old man who painted the gray world to save his home. Listen, have you ever felt out of place? Like the world around you is rapidly changing, growing glass and steel, while you remain in your little shabby house, which obstructs progress? Honestly, it's scary. It's frightening to realize that the place where you've spent your whole life could become a pile of rubble under the tracks of a bulldozer tomorrow. Most people in such a situation simply pack their bags and leave. But one veteran decided that his last line of defense would not be a weapon, but an ordinary paintbrush. Let's transport ourselves to the city of Taichung in the late 2000s. Imagine an area called the Military Family Settlement. Sounds solid, doesn't it? But in reality, these were temporary, cramped houses built back in the late 1940s. Time had not been kind to them. The walls were cracked, the roofs sagged, and the young people had long moved to skyscrapers. The government decided to demolish everything, to level it all and build a modern residential complex in its place. Residents began to leave, one by one. Silence settled in the empty courtyards. Out of 1,000 families, only a few remained. Among them was Huang Yunfu. He was 86 years old at that time. Picture this man, a small, thin figure with kind eyes and calloused hands. He had lived in this settlement for 40 years. For him, these walls were not just bricks. They represented his memories, his friends, his life. He was offered money, a new apartment in a modern building, but he shook his head. "I won't leave," he whispered. "This is my home." But how can you stop the bulldozer if you only have your pension in your pocket? Huang sat in his empty room. He was bored and very sad. Then he took a can of paint that had been sitting in the storeroom and painted a small bird on the wall, bright yellow with a red crest, then a cat, then flowers. But wait, he couldn't stop there. He went outside and began to paint the gray, peeling walls of his home. Red, turquoise, orange, pink. Fantastical animals bloomed on the concrete, alongside opera heroes, astronauts, and simply amusing little figures. He painted every day from 4 in the morning until it got too hot. Soon, his house became a riot of colors, but Huang went further. He started painting the neighboring abandoned houses, then fences, and then the very road beneath his feet. The settlement, which once looked like a backdrop for a post-apocalyptic film, suddenly transformed into a living rainbow. Every crack in the wall was stopped by the smile of a fantastical creature. In 2010, students from the local university accidentally wandered into this neighborhood. They gasped. Imagine their shock. Amidst the gray boxes of the metropolis, they discovered a true psychedelic paradise, created by a single grandfather. They took photos of Huang, his paintings, and posted them online. It was an explosion. The Rainbow Village went viral. Thousands of people traveled to Taichung to see this wonder. The government found itself in an awkward position. The bulldozers were already revving up, but public outcry erupted. People signed petitions. Don't destroy the art. In the end, the authorities capitulated. They officially declared the village a cultural site and park zone. The settlement was saved. Huang Yunfu, who everyone began to call the Rainbow Grandfather, lived in his village until 101 years old. He painted almost until his last day. He proved that beauty is the most powerful protection, that one person with a paintbrush can stop a steel machine if there is enough color in their heart. This is a story about the fact that it is never too late to start creating, and that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, from the power of imagination. This is story number 30, A Bird That Forgot How to Disappear. Well, we have reached the end of our journey. Listen, I thought for a long time about which story to leave for last. I wanted something that would make you breathe out and feel hope. You know, in our vast, noisy world, it's easy to decide that one small creature doesn't really matter. But reality is a delicate thing. Sometimes the future of an entire species can hang on a single wing. Let us transport ourselves to the Chatham Islands. This tiny archipelago in the Pacific Ocean is lost somewhere between New Zealand and Antarctica. The year is 1980. The place is harsh. Stormy winds, cold ocean sprays, and dense low forests. This is where a quiet drama unfolded. Ornithologists, led by Don Merton, realized that there were only 5 black robins left on the whole planet. 5. Imagine the scale of that. Not 5,000, not 500, just 5 small birds, as black as coal, that could fit in the palm of your hand. This was the brink of extinction, a death sentence that nature was ready to sign. But there was an even more serious problem. Among those 5 birds, there was only one female capable of producing offspring. The scientists named her Old Blue due to the color of the ring on her leg. Honestly, the chances of saving them were 0. Biology textbooks state that such a small group is doomed to genetic extinction. Everyone was anticipating the end. But Don Merton decided that textbooks could wait. He came up with a crazy, incredibly risky plan. He decided to become a godfather to the birds. When Old Blue laid her eggs, Don and his team, no, they didn't just sit and watch. They took the eggs from the nest. You might ask why. This is madness. But wait, Don knew a trick. If a bird's first clutch is taken away, it will immediately start building a new nest and lay eggs again. He wanted to double the number of chicks, but who would incubate the first eggs? Merton placed them in the nests of other birds, yellow-crowned parakeets, and, imagine this, they accepted the strays. The parakeets incubated the robin eggs, fed them, and protected them from the wind. It was like the strangest comedy of errors in the animal kingdom. Don Merton lived in a tent, in mud, in the rain, not seeing his family for months. He literally hand-reared each chick. He carried them through the forest in boxes, warmed them under his coat, and monitored every flap of their wings. And then a miracle happened. Old Blue turned out to be incredibly fertile and resilient. She lived for 14 years, twice as long as typical birds of her species. She became the matriarch of the entire current population. Today, more than 300 black robins live on the Chatham Islands, and all of them, absolutely all, are descendants of that very Old Blue. This is a story about how biological laws sometimes yield to the determination of one person and the will to live of one tiny bird. When you look at the photo of Don Merton, with a little black bird sitting in the palm of his hand, you see not just a biologist. You see a moment when a person decided to correct a mistake and repay a debt to nature. And thus, our cycle of 30 chapters comes to an end. We talked about houses in the rocks, about worlds locked in bottles, about singing stones and brave children. These stories are like those little black currents. They are small, but they contain immense power. The power of wonder that makes our lives just a bit brighter. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Remember, the world is full of wonders. You just have to know how to look. Or sometimes, you might just need to wait an extra 54 years, like that Japanese marathon runner. Our archive is always open for those who seek the extraordinary in the ordinary. Until we meet again.